The streets of downtown Chicago had grown eerily quiet that night. It was almost as if the city itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Lucy Williams sat in the back of a yellow taxi, staring out the window, her thoughts lost in the hum of the tires on the asphalt. The glow from the streetlights reflected off the wet pavement, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch into nothingness. She'd just received the news of her promotion at work, something she'd been working toward for months. But there was something about the silence that night that felt off. She shook her head, trying to focus on the excitement of her new opportunity. But the tension in the air wouldn't let her forget. The taxi driver glanced in his rearview mirror, noticing her restlessness. "Everything all right, miss?" he asked, his voice low and hesitant. Lucy forced a smile. "Yeah, just tired, I guess." As they turned onto a darker stretch of the road, the feeling of unease intensified. The faint sound of barking in the distance reached her ears, but she quickly dismissed it. It wasn't unusual for a dog to be out on a night like this. She refocused her attention on her phone, scrolling through emails, until a sharp jolt from the car made her look up. Without warning, the taxi veered to the right, its tires screeching against the wet road. The driver's foot slammed the brake, but it was too late. The vehicle lurched forward, and Lucy felt herself thrown against the seatbelt, her heart racing. "Hold on!" the driver shouted. But it wasn't the crash that would stay with her. It was what happened next. The door to the taxi flew open with a force that startled Lucy, and in an instant, a large, powerful German shepherd leapt inside. Its eyes locked onto her with an intensity she had never seen before. Max. The canine. Lucy didn't have time to process what was happening before the dog's jaws latched onto her purse, yanking it from her lap with alarming force. She gasped in shock, her hands instinctively trying to hold onto the bag, but the dog was faster, stronger, and relentless. It wasn't just the bag Max was after. There was something far more sinister unfolding, but Lucy couldn't yet understand the full scope of it. In the blink of an eye, Officer Jake Monroe appeared at the taxi's door, his expression unreadable as he took in the scene. Max stood by Lucy's side, still gripping the purse in his jaws, his body tense as if waiting for a command. The officer didn't hesitate. He knelt beside the dog, his gloved hands carefully pulling the purse away. "What's going on here?" Monroe asked, his voice calm but with a sense of urgency beneath it. He glanced at Lucy, then back to the dog. Lucy shook her head, still in shock. "I don't know. He just grabbed my purse. It's all I had. I wasn't expecting this." Monroe's eyes narrowed, his gaze shifting from the dog to the purse. He raised an eyebrow, his suspicion growing. "It's not just a purse, is it, Max?" he muttered, more to the canine than to anyone else. It took a moment for Lucy to grasp the weight of his words. Why would a trained police dog react this way? It was just a purse, right? But Max was no ordinary dog, and the more Monroe inspected the bag, the more it seemed that something wasn't right. The canine, usually calm and composed in high-stress situations, was on edge, his focus unyielding. Something inside that bag was triggering a response that even Monroe couldn't immediately explain. Lucy tried to stand, but her legs felt weak. She had to know what was going on. "Is this some kind of joke? I just got promoted. I'm trying to get home. What does my purse have to do with anything?" Monroe's lips pressed into a tight line. He wasn't about to share his concerns with her. Not yet. "We'll figure this out, Miss Williams. Don't worry." But Lucy wasn't convinced. The confusion in her mind only grew as she stared at Max, his fur bristling, his nose sniffing at the bag. She could see the determination in the officer's eyes as he handed the purse back to Max, who immediately seized it again, as though he had a personal stake in the matter. And that's when it hit her. The purse wasn't the target. It was the bag that had become a warning. In that moment, Lucy felt a cold rush of realization. She was now entangled in something much darker than a random incident. But before she could ask another question, Monroe held up a hand. "We need to get this to the station. I'm going to need you to come with us, Miss Williams." With a mixture of dread and confusion, Lucy followed the officer, unsure of what was happening, or what she had just become part of. But one thing was for sure: this was no accident. Before we continue, make sure to hit that subscribe button on the Heroes for Animals channel. We dive deep into stories like this, where heroes like Max and Officer Monroe make the impossible possible. Stay tuned for more incredible rescues and untold truths. Lucy sat in the sterile, fluorescent-lit room at the police station, trying to make sense of everything that had happened. It felt like a bad dream, one she couldn't wake up from. Her hands were shaking, not from fear, but from the sheer confusion of it all. What had she done to deserve this? Was she just in the wrong place at the wrong time? Or was something much darker unfolding around her, and she was somehow at the center of it? Officer Monroe had been patient, at least. After Max, his canine, had grabbed her purse from the taxi, they'd escorted her to the station for questioning. She had no idea why she was there or what was going on. All she knew was that a police dog had treated her bag like it was a dangerous weapon, and now she was stuck in some strange, unfamiliar place. A cup of lukewarm coffee sat untouched on the table in front of her. She didn't feel like drinking it. Her mind was racing too fast. Monroe hadn't told her much yet, but she could see the wheels turning in his head. He was trying to piece things together, just like she was. The door opened, and Monroe stepped inside with another officer, a younger man with sharp eyes and a notebook in hand. His name tag read Officer Harris. He gave her a polite nod before sitting across from her. "Miss Williams, I know this is a lot to process," Monroe began, his voice calm but tinged with something serious. "But we need you to go over the events of the night again. We're trying to understand what exactly happened." Lucy exhaled sharply, trying to clear her head. "I already told you everything I remember," she said, her voice sounding hollow. "I was just on my way home. I had no idea what was going on. One minute I was riding in a taxi, and the next there's a dog attacking my purse and the cars swerving all over the place." Monroe exchanged a look with Officer Harris before he responded. "You're sure there was nothing unusual about your purse before Max reacted to it?" Lucy frowned. "What do you mean? I told you it was just a regular purse. It's just a leather bag I've had for a while." But Monroe wasn't convinced. "It's not the bag itself. It's what was inside. Max has never acted like that before, not even close. Something set him off. And I think you're involved in something you don't fully understand yet." Lucy felt a knot tighten in her stomach. "Involved in what? What are you talking about? I'm just a regular person. I work at a marketing firm. I don't know anything about whatever this is." Harris leaned forward, his expression intense. "That's the thing, Miss Williams. You are involved in something. Something much bigger than you realize." She swallowed hard. "Please, just tell me what's going on. Why is this happening to me?" Monroe sat back, studying her with a sharp gaze. "It's not about you, Lucy. It's about the people who used you. The bag you were carrying wasn't just an ordinary purse. It contained a device that's linked to a very dangerous operation. You were carrying it unknowingly, but now you're tangled in something that's far from over." The words hung in the air like smoke. Lucy could barely process what he was saying. "A device? What kind of device? What's going on?" Monroe didn't answer immediately. Instead, he looked at Harris, who stood and left the room. Monroe turned back to Lucy, his voice softer now, as if he were choosing his words carefully. "We don't have all the details yet, But we think that device is tied to a series of high-profile crimes that have been going on under our noses for years. It's a sophisticated setup. Criminals who've been operating in the shadows, using unsuspecting people like you to carry out their dirty work. Lucy felt the floor beneath her shift. Are you saying someone planted that thing in my purse? That I didn't know it was there? Monroe nodded grimly. Exactly. We're still piecing everything together, but there's a clear pattern. The device was meant to be passed off, unnoticed, and to reach a particular destination. The problem is, you were the one who ended up with it. Her mind was reeling. She couldn't understand how this could have happened to her. It wasn't like she'd been targeted. She hadn't even noticed anyone suspicious in the days leading up to this. She was just living her life, working, moving through her days like anyone else. Why me? Lucy asked quietly, her voice trembling. Why would anyone use me for something like this? Monroe sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. We're still investigating, but it's possible they knew you'd be an easy mark. You were in the wrong place at the wrong time. This whole thing is like a chess game, and you've been caught in the middle of it. Whoever is behind this has been setting up for months, if not longer. You just happened to get swept up in it. Lucy's mind raced. So what happens now? What do I do? Monroe leaned forward, his gaze softening a bit. What happens now is that we need your help, Lucy. We're going to protect you, but we need to figure out who's behind this, what their endgame is, and how to stop it before it escalates any further. She felt a strange sense of relief mixed with fear. The idea that she was now part of something so vast and dangerous was almost too much to bear. But there was no turning back now. She was in the middle of a criminal conspiracy, and whether she liked it or not, her life would never be the same. Okay, she said, the words coming out in a breathless rush. I'll help however I can, but you have to promise me something. Monroe raised an eyebrow, his expression unreadable. What's that? Promise me you'll get to the bottom of this, she said, her voice steady now. Promise me you'll stop whoever's doing this so no one else gets hurt. Monroe nodded solemnly. We will. You have my word. Lucy spent the next few hours in a haze of confusion, trying to piece together what had happened, but nothing made sense. The sterile walls of the police station seemed to close in on her as Officer Monroe and his team continued their investigation, asking more questions than she could answer. All she knew for sure was that her life had just been flipped upside down, and she had no idea who to trust. Monroe had promised to protect her, but what did that even mean? Would they send her home with a few extra precautions, or was there something far more dangerous she wasn't being told? The questions swirled around her like a storm. The worst part was how powerless she felt. She had always prided herself on being in control of her own life, on making smart decisions and keeping a level head in difficult situations. But now, she was stuck in the middle of something dark and sinister, and she had no control over how it was all going to play out. As Monroe entered the room again, his serious expression told Lucy that something had changed. He didn't say anything right away, just gestured for her to follow him. She stood up, her legs unsteady as though the weight of the situation was finally catching up with her. Her heart pounded as she walked down the hall, her mind racing with thoughts of what was to come. Where are we going? She asked, her voice shaky. We're taking you to a safe house, Monroe replied. It's temporary, but we need to keep you out of sight while we figure out who's behind all of this. Lucy nodded, her throat dry. How long do I have to stay there? How long until it's safe? We don't know yet, Monroe said, his voice low. We're still trying to track down the people who planted that device on you. They could be watching you right now, and we don't know who they are yet. For now, we're keeping you under protection. Your safety is our priority. They arrived at an unmarked van parked in the back lot of the station. Monroe opened the side door, and Lucy stepped inside. The interior was plain, nothing like the luxury taxis she was used to taking. There were no windows, just dim lighting and two seats facing each other. Monroe sat across from her and nodded for her to take a seat. As the van started moving, Lucy tried to calm her racing thoughts. "So, what's the deal with that device?" she asked, her voice trembling despite her efforts to stay calm. "What exactly is it, and why would someone want to use me to transport it?" Monroe met her eyes, his face hardening. "That's what we're trying to figure out. The device in your purse is a high-tech, encrypted piece of equipment. We've seen similar technology used in high-profile heists, money laundering operations, and—" he paused, glancing down, "in some of the most dangerous networks we've ever tracked. This is big, Lucy. Really big." Lucy's stomach churned at the thought. "Are you telling me I've been carrying around something that could have gotten me killed?" Monroe sighed, rubbing his eyes. "It's not just about the device itself. It's about who wants it and why. Whoever's behind this has access to resources we don't fully understand yet. They could be connected to anything: cartels, underground tech syndicates, organized crime. You're just the latest pawn in a much bigger game." Lucy could feel the weight of those words sink in. She wasn't just a victim. She was a part of something much more dangerous. And now she was on the run. "Who are these people?" Lucy asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "We don't know yet," Monroe answered. "That's what we need to figure out. But they've been operating in the shadows for a long time. They've managed to stay under the radar, making sure that anyone who gets close to uncovering them ends up disappearing. And now you're tangled up in their web." She felt her heart race again. "So, what do I do now? What do we do now?" Monroe's eyes softened. "Right now, you stay safe, and we keep moving. I'm not going to let anything happen to you, Lucy, but we're running out of time." The van stopped abruptly, and Monroe's tense posture told her they were no longer on a routine route. "We're here," he said quietly. "Stay close. Don't make any sudden moves." The moment they stepped out of the van, Lucy was struck by how quiet everything was. They were in a residential area, but the houses were all dark, and there wasn't a single person in sight. Monroe led her to a house on the corner, its exterior plain and unassuming, blending in with the rest of the block. There were no signs of security, no obvious measures to protect the home. Inside, the house was sparse, furniture covered in dust, lights dim, everything functional but minimal. Monroe led her to a room at the back. "You'll be staying here for now," he said, his tone matter-of-fact. "We'll have someone on watch outside. You won't be alone." Lucy nodded, trying to absorb everything. She wasn't sure how she felt about this place. Everything about it felt off, like she was a prisoner instead of someone being protected. But she didn't have much of a choice. She couldn't go home. She couldn't risk putting anyone she loved in danger. "How long before we figure out who did this?" Lucy asked, her voice barely a whisper. "I don't know," Monroe said, his eyes dark with frustration. "But we're not stopping until we do." Just as Monroe turned to leave the room, his phone buzzed. He pulled it out and checked the screen, his face tightening. "Stay here. I need to check something out," he said, his voice low. Lucy nodded, watching him leave, feeling more alone than ever. She didn't know what was going to happen next, or who she could trust, but one thing was clear. Her life had just taken a dark turn, and she wasn't sure how or if she was going to survive it. Lucy had barely slept that night. The quiet house, with its dim lighting and unwelcoming atmosphere, felt more like a cage than a safe haven. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of the wind outside, had her on edge. The weight of what she had learned, the horrifying truth that she was caught in the middle of something so much bigger than herself, kept her wide awake, her mind whirling. She had been so naive. It had started out as just another night, a normal ride home in a taxi, a typical day at work, and then, in an instant, Everything had changed. The bag, the device, Max's strange reaction. None of it made sense. She couldn't stop thinking about it. And what had Monroe said? "This is big, Lucy. Really big." She could still hear his words echoing in her mind. Lucy sat up in the cold, empty room, her legs pulled to her chest, her arms wrapped around them. She stared at the bare walls, the silence pressing in on her. It felt like the world outside had forgotten her. Monroe had promised her safety, but it was hard to feel safe when she didn't know who was after her, why they wanted her, or what they would do if they found her. The night dragged on, and the only company she had were her thoughts. She tried to focus on the faint sound of rain tapping against the window, but it did little to calm her nerves. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the flash of Max's eyes, his intense, determined stare, and it made her stomach churn. Something about the way he had reacted to her purse felt personal, as if he knew there was something more inside, something important. But what? At some point, she must have drifted off because the next thing she knew, Monroe was standing in the doorway, his face hard with concern. "You need to wake up, Lucy," he said, his voice firm but not unkind. "We have a problem." Lucy blinked, still groggy, her mind struggling to catch up. "What did you mean? What's happening now?" Monroe didn't waste time with pleasantries. "We got a lead. We think we know who's behind all of this. We need to move. Now." Lucy's heart skipped a beat. Wait! You mean they're coming for me?" she asked, panic creeping into her voice. "Isn't this supposed to be a safe house?" "It is," Monroe said, his eyes narrowing. "But we don't know who we're dealing with. Whoever these people are, they have eyes everywhere. They know you're here, and they know we're getting closer to figuring out what this whole thing is about." A cold shiver ran down her spine. She hadn't realized how vulnerable she was until now. She'd thought Monroe and his team were keeping her safe, but now, standing in the doorway with that grim expression on his face, she could see that they were just as much in the dark as she was. "How close are they?" she asked, her voice shaky. "Too close," Monroe replied. "We don't have a lot of time. We need to get out of here. Now. Pack light. Take only what you need. I'll be back in 10 minutes. Lucy nodded, her mind racing as she grabbed a few essentials from the dresser. Her hands were unsteady, but she forced herself to focus. She didn't know what would happen next, but one thing was clear. Her life was no longer in her control. The sound of footsteps outside the room made her freeze. It was hard to tell if it was the wind or something more sinister. Monroe's voice, low and urgent, broke the silence. "Lucy, we need to go, now!" She grabbed her bag and followed him, her heart hammering in her chest. As they hurried down the dark hallway, the feeling of being hunted settled in. Monroe led her through the back door of the house, where another officer, Officer Harris, the one she'd met the night before, was waiting by an unmarked car. "Everything's set," Harris said, his voice calm but tight with tension. "We're ready to move out." Lucy didn't have time to ask questions. She just climbed into the back seat of the car, her hands gripping the door as they sped off into the night. As they drove, Lucy tried to keep her mind clear, but it was hard. Her thoughts kept racing. Who were these people? What did they want from her? And what was in that damn bags that had set all of this into motion? Monroe had said it was linked to a criminal syndicate. But that was all he'd told her. There was so much left unsaid, and she was running out of time to piece it all together. "We're heading to a different location," Monroe said, his voice low from the front seat. "It's another safe house, but this one's better protected." Lucy nodded, though she wasn't sure she believed him. How could she trust anyone anymore? Every time she thought she was getting closer to the truth, the ground seemed to shift beneath her. She was no longer sure what was real and what was part of some twisted game. She looked out the window, her eyes scanning the darkness as they passed through the empty streets. The car took a sharp turn and drove down a side road, the headlights cutting through the night. Monroe's voice was the only sound in the car. "We're getting closer to the next spot," he said, his tone now more measured, almost like he was preparing her for something. "But I need to warn you. If they know where you are, we're walking right into their trap. Be ready for anything." Lucy felt a knot tighten in her stomach. "What do you mean, be ready?" "Stay alert," Monroe said, his eyes glancing in the rearview mirror. "We don't know who's after you, but we can't afford to be caught off guard." The tension in the car was palpable. Lucy's heart raced, her body tensed, as if bracing for the worst. Monroe's warning was clear. They were heading into dangerous territory, and there was no guarantee they would make it out unscathed. The car stopped abruptly, and Monroe signaled for them to get out. They were at another house, this one even more isolated than the last. Lucy stepped out, her legs unsteady, and followed Monroe to the door. Inside, the house was dark, with only a few lights flickering on in the distance. "We're safe here," Monroe said, his voice low as he closed the door behind them. "But we need to move quickly. I'm going to check the perimeter. Harris, stay with her." Harris nodded and moved toward the back of the house. Monroe disappeared into the shadows, leaving Lucy alone with her thoughts. As the minutes dragged on, Lucy couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching her. The silence in the house was suffocating, and every creak of the floorboards made her jump. She looked out the window, her heart hammering, as she waited for whatever came next. She didn't know what was happening or why it had to happen to her. But one thing was certain. She wasn't running from danger anymore. She was running towards it. Lucy sat on the edge of the worn-out couch, her hands nervously twisting together. The safe house was quiet. Too quiet. The dim glow from the single light bulb hanging overhead barely illuminated the bare walls of the small room. She had been here for hours, her mind unable to rest, her heart still pounding in her chest from the past few days of chaos. Monroe and Harris had done their rounds, checking every door and window, making sure no one was following them. But Lucy couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. They had been moving so fast, constantly running, never stopping long enough to catch their breath. And now, as the minutes ticked by, she couldn't help but wonder, why had she been chosen? Why her? The sound of footsteps approaching snapped her out of her thoughts. Monroe entered the room, his face set with grim determination. He didn't waste time with pleasantries, his eyes scanning the room before settling on her. "We need to talk," he said quietly, his voice low but urgent. Things just got more complicated. Lucy stood, her heart sinking. "What do you mean? What's happening now?" Monroe didn't respond immediately. He sat down across from her, his eyes never leaving hers. "We just got word that they're on to us. They know where you are. And they're coming." She felt a chill run down her spine, her breath catching in her throat. "How do you know?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Monroe leaned forward, his hands clasped together. "We've been tracking them, Lucy. Every move they make. They've been using every resource they have to find you, and we've barely been able to keep up. But now, they've closed in." Her mind raced. She felt like she was falling into an abyss with no way out. "What do we do now? What's the plan?" Monroe's jaw tightened. "We stay put. For now, at least. I know it's not ideal, but we're not going to run again. We can't. They want you because they think you know something. Something that could bring their whole operation down. They'll stop at nothing to get their hands on you." Lucy's stomach twisted. The idea of being hunted, of being the focal point of some vast conspiracy, made her feel small, powerless. She hadn't signed up for any of this. She was just a woman trying to make a living, trying to move forward. And now She was caught in the middle of something far darker than she could have imagined. "But what do I know?" she asked, her voice shaking. "What's so important about me? I don't understand." Monroe hesitated for a moment, then exhaled slowly. "It's not about you, Lucy. It's about the device, the one in your purse. That's what they're after. That's why they're willing to do anything to get to you. It's not just some piece of tech. It's a key, a very important key to something much bigger." Lucy felt like the ground had been pulled out from under her. A key? To what? The questions piled up, but before she could ask anything more, Monroe stood and walked to the window, peering out into the darkness. "We've been investigating them for months. The people behind all of this. They're not just any criminals. This goes beyond petty thefts and small-time drug deals. What we're dealing with here is an international syndicate. They've infiltrated governments, businesses, law enforcement. They're untouchable, at least until now." Lucy's heart skipped a beat. "And you think they want me to help them?" Monroe turned, his face hard. "No. They want you dead. Or they want you silent. They've already been covering their tracks, hiding everything they've done. But that device? It's the thing that could expose everything. That's why you're in danger. They think you're the key to stopping them." Lucy's mind was racing. She wasn't a criminal. She was just an ordinary woman who had gotten caught up in something she didn't understand. The device in her purse. It was supposed to be a secret. It was supposed to be invisible, unnoticed. But it had been far from that. And now, it was her responsibility to keep it safe, to make sure no one got their hands on it. "So what now?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. "What do we do? How do we stop them?" Monroe looked at her, his expression softening slightly. "We fight, but we do it carefully. We can't afford to make any mistakes. If we do, it's over." A silence hung between them, heavy with the weight of what was at stake. Lucy felt her pulse racing. There was no turning back now. Whatever had been started with that bag, with that device, was bigger than anything she could have imagined. And there was no escape from it. Monroe's voice broke the silence again. "We're going to need help. We can't do this alone. But I'm not leaving you, Lucy. Not after everything you've been through. You're not alone in this anymore." Lucy nodded, the knot in her stomach tightening even more. She didn't know what the next few hours or days would bring. But one thing was certain. They were going to have to face whatever was coming. And they were going to have to do it together. As Monroe left the room, his footsteps fading down the hallway, Lucy sat back down on the couch. The fear in her chest was almost suffocating, but she refused to let it control her. She had to stay strong. She had to survive. She had to fight back. The weight of the situation had never felt heavier than it did now. Lucy stood by the window of the safe house, staring out into the inky blackness of the night. The streets were deserted, but she could feel the presence of danger lurking in the shadows, creeping ever closer. It was like a slow-moving storm, and she was right in its path. The device, her purse, the key to everything, was the center of a maelstrom that threatened to consume her. She had thought she could handle this, thought that Monroe and his team could protect her. But now, as the hours dragged on, she wasn't so sure. The plan had been to lay low, to stay hidden, but that was before they'd learned just how far the syndicate's reach stretched. Lucy was more than just a pawn in their game. She was the final piece of the puzzle, and she had no idea how much longer she could keep playing. The door to the small room creaked open, and Monroe stepped inside, his expression unreadable. He had been quiet for the past few hours, his focus intense, but Lucy could see the toll it was taking on him. The lines of exhaustion were clear on his face, but his resolve was stronger than ever. "We got company," he said, his voice steady but filled with urgency. They know exactly where we are. We don't have much time. Lucy's heart skipped a beat. How do you know? How are they tracking us? Monroe's eyes flickered, a brief moment of uncertainty crossing his face before he regained control. We don't know yet, but they've been watching us for a while. They've got people on the inside, people we never suspected. It's bigger than we thought, Lucy. They've been playing us this whole time. She felt the weight of those words sink in. She was a part of something far more dangerous than she had realized. It wasn't just about the device anymore. It was about survival. And with the walls closing in, the only way out was through. Monroe's voice broke through her thoughts. We need to leave. Now. It's the only chance we have. Lucy's mind raced. Where are we going? Underground, he said simply. We've got a safe house, but it's off the grid. No phones, no communication. We'll be completely cut off. But it's the only place we can go where they won't find us. She nodded, her stomach a tight knot of fear. The thought of being completely isolated, alone in the dark, felt suffocating. But she didn't have a choice. The danger was real, and if she wanted to survive, she had to trust Monroe, even if it felt like she was walking straight into the lion's den. They gathered their things in silence, each of them moving with purpose. Monroe gave her a brief, reassuring glance as they made their way out the back door and into the waiting car. Harris was already in the driver's seat, his face set in grim determination. The car was small and unmarked, just like the one they'd used to get here. It wasn't much, but it was all they had. As they drove through the winding streets, Lucy could feel the weight of every second pressing down on her. She knew they weren't far from the edge of town, but she didn't know how far they'd have to go before they were truly safe. They kept their eyes peeled, watching for any sign that they were being followed. Every turn, every stoplight felt like a risk. The tension was thick in the air, and Lucy's thoughts kept circling back to the same question. How long could they keep running? It wasn't long before the familiar hum of city traffic faded away, and the landscape outside the car began to change. They were heading into unfamiliar territory now, away from the safety of the urban sprawl and into the quiet isolation of the rural outskirts. The roads became narrower, the buildings fewer and farther apart. The world outside the car seemed to disappear as they ventured deeper into the unknown. Monroe's voice broke the silence. We're almost there, he said, his tone tight. Stay alert. Once we get to the house, we're on our own. No backup, no help. We need to make sure we don't get caught. Lucy swallowed hard, her throat dry. How do we even know if we can trust the people at the safe house? What if they're part of the syndicate? Monroe glanced at her, his eyes dark with worry. We don't know, but we don't have a choice. They're the only ones who can help us disappear for good. The car slowed as they approached a small cabin tucked away in a secluded area. The trees around it were dense, and the only light came from the faint glow of the moon above. Lucy's heart raced as the car stopped in front of the cabin. Monroe and Harris quickly got out, scanning the area for any signs of danger before motioning for Lucy to follow. Inside, the cabin was modest, nothing more than a small kitchen, a few bedrooms, and a living area. But it was safe, at least for now. Monroe shut the door behind them and locked it, making sure every window was secure before turning to face Lucy. We'll be safe here, he said, his voice low, but we need to move fast. We don't know how long we have before they find us. Lucy nodded, her mind still reeling. What's the next step? What do we do now? Monroe looked at her with a mixture of determination and resignation. Now, we wait. We wait for the right moment to strike. And when that moment comes, we end this. Lucy felt a strange calm settle over her. It was a terrifying thought, but it was the only path left. The fight was coming, whether she was ready for it or not. For the first time in days, she allowed herself to sit down. She wasn't sure what the future held, but one thing was clear: she wasn't running anymore. She was ready to face whatever came next, and she was going to do it on her own terms. Thank you for following Lucy's journey through this intense, suspenseful story. What do you think is going to happen next? Do you think Lucy and Monroe can pull off the impossible? Let us know your thoughts in the comments.